I don't expect sympathy here, and I'm not really asking for forgiveness either. This is more like putting something heavy down after carrying it too long. A few years ago, I ran a small but loyal online business. Nothing flashy, subscription-based, niche audience, the kind of thing where customers weren't just numbers. They knew my name. Some of them emailed me like we were friends. Birthdays, personal updates. "Thanks for what you do, William." That kind of thing. And that's exactly what made it valuable. At first, I told myself I was just tired. Burnout is real when you're the whole operation, support, marketing, product, everything. But if I'm being honest, it wasn't just exhaustion. It was envy. I kept seeing people cash out, selling their companies, walking away with money I couldn't even picture at the time. But my business? It wasn't built to sell. No investors, no scalable tech, just people trusting me. And then one night, staring at my inbox full of names, emails, payment histories, actual human loyalty neatly organized in rows, I had a thought that should have scared me more than it did. What if trust itself is the product? That was the moment something shifted. I didn't decide to commit a crime right then. Not consciously, anyway. But that's when I stopped thinking like a business owner, and started thinking like someone who could exploit what he had. And once that door opens, it doesn't close easily. I didn't wake up the next day thinking, "All right, let's betray a few hundred people." It was slower than that. More subtle. Like adjusting your moral compass 1 degree at a time until you're no longer pointing north and don't even notice. At first, I framed it as a harmless idea. People sell businesses all the time, right? Customer lists get transferred, ownership changes, it's normal. That's what I told myself. I even Googled it, read a few articles about exit strategies and asset valuation. I clung to those phrases like they gave me permission. But here's the part one avoided saying out loud: my business wasn't just a product. It was me. My voice, my reputation, the sense of safety people felt interacting with me. If I handed that over to someone else, especially without telling them, I wasn't just selling data. I was selling access. Influence. Trust one didn't have the right to transfer. Still, I kept pushing that thought aside. Bills were piling up. Growth had stalled. And then someone reached out, not randomly, but through a quiet referral. They were interested in acquiring digital assets. That's how they phrased it. It sounded clean. Professional. I replied. The message itself was short. No fluff, no emojis, no small talk, just straight to the point. They introduced themselves as someone who specialized in acquiring under-monetized digital communities. That phrasing stuck with me. Not customers. Not people. Communities. We moved to a call a few days later. I remember pacing around my apartment, trying to sound more confident than I felt. They asked precise questions: retention rates, churn, average lifetime value. I answered everything, almost automatically. I knew my numbers inside out. That part felt normal, almost comforting. Then came the shift. They asked how? Personality dependent. The business was. I hesitated. That was the whole thing. Without me, it didn't really exist in the same way. I tried to downplay it, said I had systems in place, templates, automation. Half-truths at best. They didn't push back. Just nodded and said something that, in hindsight, should have stopped me cold. We can work with that. Our clients are used to transitions like this. Transitions? Like people wouldn't notice. I didn't ask what their clients actually did with those communities. I think part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. But I also didn't walk away. After that call, I told myself I still had control. Nothing had happened yet. No contracts, no money, just a conversation. I could have walked away and no one would have ever known how close I got. But instead of stepping back, I leaned in. I started organizing my data more professionally. That's what I called it. Exporting subscriber lists, cleaning up duplicates, tagging users based on behavior, who opened emails, who clicked links, who replied often. On the surface, it looked like standard business hygiene. Underneath, it was something else entirely. I remember staring at one segment labeled high engagement. These were the people who trusted me the most. The ones who responded when I asked questions, who took my recommendations seriously. If anyone was going to be affected by what I was considering, it was them. That should have been the line. Instead, I reframed it. Told myself that if I did go through with it, I'd at least make sure the data was valuable. Like I was doing them a favor by making the transition smoother. It's strange how easily you can turn responsibility into justification when there's money on the other side. And there was money. Enough to change things for me. Enough to keep going. A week later, they sent over a preliminary offer. Not a formal contract yet, more like a number to test the waters. I remember opening the email and just staring at it. It was more money than I'd made in the previous year. Not life-changing in the grand sense, but for me, in that moment, it felt like an exit. A clean break. No more late nights answering support emails, no more anxiety over churn rates, no more pretending I wasn't slowly burning out. They framed it as a data acquisition with optional transition support. That wording did a lot of heavy lifting. It made the whole thing sound detached, almost clinical. Like I was selling inventory, not relationships. I asked a few surface-level questions: payment terms, timeline, what exactly they needed from me. I avoided the obvious one: what happens to the people after this? They didn't volunteer much either. Just said their partners would re-engage the audience with tailored offers. Again vague. Intentionally so, I think. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility anymore. That once the deal was done, it was out of my hands. That was the lie I needed. And I accepted the offer. Once I said yes, everything sped up, not externally, but in my head. It felt like I'd already done it, even though nothing had been transferred yet. That weird in-between space where you've committed to something wrong, but reality hasn't caught up. They sent over a draft agreement. Dense, legal, intentionally impersonal. Words like data transfer, non-disclosure, liability limitation. I skimmed more than I should have. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I didn't want to. Instead, I focused on logistics. I created backups of everything. Multiple copies, stored in different places. I told myself it was just good practice, but really it was fear creeping in. Fear of losing control, even as I was willingly giving it up. Then came the part that still bothers me the most. I started preparing my customers without telling them what I was actually doing. I drafted emails about upcoming improvements, new partnerships, vague promises of better content, more value. I softened the ground so nothing would feel abrupt when things changed. They trusted those messages. And I knew exactly how misleading they were when I hit send. The actual transfer happened on a Tuesday morning. I remember that detail because everything about it felt ordinary. No dramatic music, no sense of finality. Just me, sitting at my desk with coffee going cold, uploading files to a shared drive. They gave me a checklist. Export this. Grant access here. Confirm receipt. Step by step, like assembling furniture. If I focused only on the tasks, I could almost forget what it meant. Almost. The largest file was the full customer database. Names, emails, purchase history, notes from past conversations, little fragments of real people's lives, neatly packaged. I hovered over the upload button longer than I expected. Not because I was reconsidering, but because I knew once it was done, there was no version of this where I could undo it. When I finally clicked, nothing happened at first. Just a progress bar inching forward. 50%. 72%. 100%. And that was it. A message popped up from them. Received. Looks good. No ceremony. No acknowledgement of what I just handed over. Just confirmation that the transaction was complete. And suddenly, the silence in my apartment felt louder than usual. At first, nothing changed, at least not visibly. A couple of days passed, and my inbox stayed quiet. No complaints, no confusion. I almost let myself believe I'd gotten away with something clean. Then the replies started trickling in. It began with one email, a long-time subscriber asking if I'd partnered with a new brand, because they'd received a message that sounded like me, but wasn't. The tone was close enough to pass at a glance, but off if you knew me. I told myself this was expected. A transition. Growing pains. Then came another. And another. Different people, same confusion. Some curious, some cautious. One person asked directly if I had sold the business. I stared at that message for a long time before replying with something vague about expanding operations. That's when the pit in my stomach started forming. Because the emails they were receiving? They weren't just slightly off-brand. They were aggressive. Pushy offers, urgency tactics, things I had deliberately avoided for years. It wasn't just a change, it was a shift in intent. And my name was still attached to it. That was the part one hadn't fully thought through. Or maybe I had, and chose to ignore. About a week after the transfer, I got an email that didn't sound confused, it sounded angry. It was from someone who'd been with me almost since the beginning. Not just a customer, but one of those people who replied to newsletters, shared feedback, even defended me publicly a couple of times when others complained. The kind of person you quietly rely on more than you admit. They didn't ask questions. They accused. They pointed out the change in tone, the sudden flood of sales-driven messages, the way I was now pushing things that felt manipulative. Then came the line that stuck with me. If this is you, I completely misjudged you. If it's not, then you've let someone else wear your face. I read that sentence over and over. I started typing a response, something honest, or at least closer to it than what I'd been sending others. But halfway through I stopped. Because anything truthful would expose everything. So I deleted it. And sent back a polished, evasive reply about new direction and business evolution. They never responded. But a few hours later they unsubscribed. That felt heavier than I expected. After that email, I couldn't pretend it was just business anymore. It felt personal in a way I hadn't prepared for. So I did what I thought would help. I tried to create distance. I updated my profiles, removed mentions of the brand, quietly detached myself from anything public-facing. No big announcement, just subtle edits. If someone looked me up, it would seem like I'd moved on. At the same time, I reached out to the buyer for the first time since the transfer. I told them the messaging felt too aggressive, that it didn't align with how the audience had been built. I even used the word trust, like I still had some authority over it. Their response was short. Performance has increased significantly. We'll continue optimizing. That was it. No concern, no discussion. Just numbers. That's when it really sank in. Whatever I thought I had sold, they believed they had bought outright. Not just data, but permission to use it however they wanted. And technically, they were right. I had signed that away. Still, I kept checking my old inbox out of habit. Watching the replies come in, even though they weren't meant for me anymore. Like standing outside a house I used to live in, hearing strangers inside. What I didn't anticipate was how far the impact would spread. I thought it would stay contained, a few annoyed emails, some unsubscribes, and then silence. People move on quickly online. That's what I counted on. But some didn't. I started noticing mentions in places I hadn't checked in months. Old forums, small community groups where my business used to get recommended. At first it was subtle, someone asking if others had noticed the change. Then threads started forming. People comparing emails. Screenshots. Calling out the shift in tone, the sudden pushiness, the mismatch between what they signed up for and what they were getting now. And my name kept coming up. Not aggressively at first. more like confusion turning into suspicion. Someone even defended me, saying maybe I'd sold the business and wasn't involved anymore. That should have helped. Instead, it made it worse. Because the replies to that comment weren't kind. People talking about responsibility, about transparency. About how selling something like that without telling your users wasn't just a business move, it was a betrayal. I stopped reading after a while. But by then, I'd already seen enough to know the narrative was shifting. And I had no way to control it anymore. I thought the worst of it would stay online: comments, complaints, maybe some damage to my reputation in spaces I could avoid. I didn't expect it to reach into my real life. Then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in me already knew. I almost let it go to voicemail. I should have. Instead, I answered. It was another long-time customer. Someone who'd been around for years, but we'd only spoken once before. They skipped introductions. Did you sell our data? No build-up. No softness. Just that. I tried to deflect at first, talked about partnerships, growth, all the same vague language I'd been hiding behind. But they didn't let me. They mentioned specific emails they'd received. The kind that pushed harder than anything I'd ever sent. Then they said something quieter, almost disappointed. I recommended you to people. Do you understand that? That hit differently. Because suddenly it wasn't just about what I'd done to strangers behind a screen. It was about the chain reaction, how my decision had spread through other people's credibility too. I didn't answer their question. Not really. And they hung up before I could pretend to. After that call, the version of events I'd been telling myself stopped holding together. Up until then, I'd managed to keep things compartmentalized: business decision here, emotional fallout over there. But now it was bleeding into everything. I started second-guessing every interaction I'd had before the sale. Every thank you email, every recommendation I'd made, every moment someone chose to trust me instead of ignoring me. It all felt repurposed. Like I had retroactively turned those moments into setup for something else. Sleep got weird. Not dramatic, just inconsistent. I'd wake up thinking about specific names from the list, people I actually remembered. Not as data points, but as conversations. It's one thing to justify actions in the abstract. It's harder when your brain starts attaching faces and context back onto them. I considered coming clean more than once. Writing a proper explanation, owning it publicly. Not to fix anything. I knew that wasn't possible, but just to stop the slow drip of half-truths. But every version of that confession ended the same way, with consequences I wasn't ready to face. So I stayed quiet and let the cracks spread instead. Eventually, things quieted down. Not because they were resolved, just because people moved on, like they usually do. The complaints faded, the threads stopped updating, and my name slowly disappeared from those spaces. On paper, I got what I wanted. The money came through exactly as agreed. My workload dropped to 0 overnight. No more support tickets, no more deadlines, no more pressure to keep something alive that I'd already mentally checked out of. But the silence that replaced it wasn't relief. It felt empty. Unearned. I tried to start something new a few months later. Different niche, different audience, clean slate. But I couldn't approach it the same way. Every time someone signed up, every time I saw a new name on a list, there was this hesitation. A question I couldn't ignore anymore. What do you actually owe these people? Before, the answer had been simple. Now it wasn't. Because I knew exactly how easy it was to cross that line once you start treating trust like an asset instead of a responsibility. And I'd already proven to myself that I was capable of doing it. I've had enough time to dress this up as a lesson, but I'm careful with that word. Lessons usually imply growth, like something valuable came out of it. I'm not sure that's true here. What I gained was clarity, and it came at someone else's expense. If you strip everything down, what I did wasn't complicated. I took something that didn't fully belong to me, people's trust, and treated it like a transferable asset. I convinced myself it was normal because parts of it looked like legitimate business. That's the dangerous part. You don't cross the line in one step. You blur it until it disappears. I didn't get caught in any formal sense. No legal fallout, no dramatic consequences. Just the quieter kind, the kind that changes how you see yourself when there's no one else around. If anyone reading this is in a position where people trust you, even in a small way, don't underestimate what that actually means. It's not just leverage. It's not inventory. And once you trade it for something else, you don't really get it back.